Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are wrestling with something I think a lot of us feel deep down, even if, we can't quite pin it on a specific philosopher. It's that feeling that the effort we put out into the world, it just doesn't seem to connect anymore with what we get back. That gnawing sense that the basic moral math, the equation we thought governed modern life, is just, well, broken. So we pulled together some really fascinating source material for this, stuff that looks beyond just the usual economic charts, the graphs of inequality. It dives deep into the spiritual and psychological toll this takes. We're exploring what happens when that core promise, that contract meritocracy, kind of collapses, and it leaves behind this existential void. Our mission today is to take you on a bit of a journey, using four philosophical heavy hitters as our guides: Karl Marx, Max Weber, David Graeber, and Mark Fisher.
Yeah, and it's really crucial, I think, to frame this right from the start. This isn't just about policy failures, is it, or tweaking the tax code. It's being presented in these sources as a crisis of meaning. So when they talk about the system feeling rigged, they're getting at something much deeper than just wages or who pays what tax. They're really addressing that loss of faith in what you call the effort equals reward equation. It's fundamental.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that a bit, because what jumps out immediately, for me anyway, is how this feeling shows up in popular culture. I mean, think about that enduring dream, almost universal, of winning the lottery. Why is that so powerful? It's not just about getting rich, is it? The sources suggest it's more profound. A yearning for cosmic fairness.
Exactly. Cosmic fairness. That's a great way to put it. It's this deep human desire for a moment where the universe finally says, okay, yes, you suffered enough. You put in the hours, you played by the rules even when it hurt. Now, here's the payout. The lottery fantasy, as it's analyzed in these texts, it's presented as this sort of desperate privatized substitute, a substitute for a public contract, a social agreement that feels like it's just not working anymore. It represents that last flicker of hope that virtue, hard work, suffering, all the things we were told lead to success, just might cash out, even if it's just by sheer random luck. And then you see the contrast. People see the system theoretically designed to reward work showering unbelievable wealth on, well, those who seem to just move money around. Financial extraction, not necessarily production.
Right, while essential workers are struggling.
Precisely. And that dissonance, that visible gap, it creates this immediate sense of, well, the sources call it spiritual vertigo. It's deeply unsettling.
Yeah, vertigo is a good word for it. And the sources, they don't pull any punches, do they? They use really strong language, suggesting the whole structure operates as if it's been hacked, but not by some clever outsider. No, hacked from the inside, by those already holding the keys, essentially.
Exactly. One source even describes the beneficiaries, the ones who are really profiting from this setup, as a kind of cartel of sociopaths.
Oof. Strong stuff.
It is. But the point they're making, I think, is that this isn't just an accident. It's not a random byproduct of free markets or competition. It's presented as something ruthlessly organized, designed to maintain this inverted reality, where gravity, the weight of actual hard work seems to work backwards.
But only for a select few.
Only for the ones at the very top. And it's this feeling, this sense of systemic betrayal. That's really where our deep dive has to begin today. Okay, so to really get our heads around why this current moment feels like such a crisis, we probably need to look back a bit. We need to understand the historical scaffolding, the psychological framework that used to give inequality some kind of moral legitimacy, or at least an explanation.
Because it wasn't always seen as just unfair, right? There were reasons given.
Exactly. Throughout much of history, you had various structures, religious, cultural, that provided a framework. It might have been harsh, sure, but it offered a way to interpret why some people had wealth and others didn't.
Like divine right, or maybe poverty being seen as a spiritual test, that kind of thing.
Precisely. That structure, however rigid, it was explanatory. It allowed people to process hardship, even if the explanation boiled down to God wills it, or it's your karma, or it's a trial. There was a narrative. And then as we move out of feudalism, something really interesting happens. That spiritual explanation starts to fuse directly with economic activity itself. Which brings us, inevitably, to Max Weber and his absolutely crucial text, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Weber noticed that early capitalism wasn't just about greed. I mean, greed's always been around. But this was different. It was driven by something more. A profound sense of moral purpose. Almost a divine calling connected to work and wealth.
Okay, so what was that mechanism? How did work become sacred almost?
Well, Weber zeroed in on certain Protestant sects, particularly Calvinism. They had this intense spiritual anxiety because of the doctrine of predestination.
Meaning your salvation was already decided by God. You were either in or out, and you couldn't change it.
Exactly. You couldn't earn salvation, but you desperately wanted some sign, some reassurance that you were one of the elect, one of the chosen ones. And material success, achieved in a very specific way, through relentless hard work, thrift, saving, reinvesting, being incredibly rational and disciplined about your business, that became interpreted as a possible sign.
Ah, okay. So success wasn't proof, but it was
Yeah.
a hopeful indicator.
A hopeful indicator, yeah.
Yeah.
And crucially, this wasn't about splashing the cash or enjoying luxury. That was frowned upon. Asceticism was key. It was about the process, the hard work, the self-denial, the systematic accumulation itself. These became moral obligations, proof of your devotion and hopefully your status with God. This fusion, this connection gave early capitalism this incredibly powerful, sacred justification. You weren't just building a business, you were potentially fulfilling a divine destiny.
Wow. That's a powerful engine.
Mm.
I mean, for generations, the whole idea of effort equals reward wasn't just practical advice. It was almost a spiritual commandment.
It absolutely was.
But the sources we're looking at today argue pretty forcefully that this moral scaffolding, it's completely gone now. Kaput.
They are incredibly emphatic about this. The argument is that the spirit of capitalism, that moral core, that internal drive tied to salvation, it packed its bags and left.
When did it leave, roughly?
Yeah.
Is there a time frame?
The source material tends to point towards maybe the late 70s, early 80s. Around the Reagan and Thatcher era is often cited as a key turning point. That's when you see this massive shift towards financialization, deregulation, shareholder value becoming the absolute prime directive.
Right. The focus shifted.
Exactly. The structures that kind of enforced shared prosperity, or at least put some brakes on pure abstraction, like strong unions, higher taxes on capital gains and inheritance, they started being systematically dismantled. The moral rationale for getting rich, that it benefited the community, fueled innovation everyone shared, and that faded, it was replaced by just private gain, full stop.
So what's left then, if the spirit is gone?
What's left is the mechanism, the machine of capitalism, the accumulation, the drive for efficiency, the relentless work ethic, the language of meritocracy. All that stuff is still there. Modern capitalism keeps operating as if it still has that Weberian moral mandate. It demands the same kind of devotion.
But the morality itself?
Dissolved. It just dissolved into pure, unrestrained profit motive. We're left with the ghost of a moral system, still demanding sacrifice, but offering no real transcendent reward, no corresponding virtue.
Which brings us right up to today, doesn't it? And this agonizing feeling that effort and reward are just inverted.
Yeah.
If hard work was the moral path, what is it now?
Well, according to these sources, in the 21st century, hard work doesn't reliably lead to success anymore. For many, maybe most, it leads primarily to one thing: exhaustion.
Just burnout.
Burnout. The effort is still demanded, often more intensely than ever, but the reward, it's become detached, disconnected. You see immense wealth being generated passively. People owning assets, controlling leverage hedge funds, private equity doing leveraged buyouts that often hollow out companies, landlords riding a wave of unaffordable housing.
And they're rewarded massively, often without breaking a sweat in the traditional sense.
Precisely. Reward without corresponding productive effort in many cases. It's about owning, manipulating, extracting.
And meanwhile, the majority of people are stuck in what you might call productive exhaustion.
That's a good term for it. The people doing the really tough, essential jobs, physically, mentally, emotionally draining work, nurses, teachers, warehouse workers, care workers.
The ones who keep things running.
They are constantly running faster, just stand still, it feels like.
Yeah.
Generating enormous value for the system, for shareholders, for owners. But they themselves often face stagnating or declining real wages, eroding benefits, and just crushing levels of burnout. The dawning realization, the sources argue, is that the system increasingly rewards extraction over production, taking value out rather than creating it.
And that's the root of the spiritual vertigo, isn't it? It's not
Mhm.
just feeling like the system is hard. It's feeling like it's fundamentally illogical, irrational.
Yes. It asks you to internalize this belief. Just push harder. Keep grinding. The moral universe will eventually pay out.
But when it doesn't.
When it consistently doesn't, you don't necessarily question the system's logic, do you? At first, anyway.
No, you question yourself. Did I not work hard enough? Am I not smart enough? What did I do wrong?
Exactly. And that internalized failure is absolutely devastating. It eats away at you. The really profound implication synthesizing across these sources is that this karmic contract, the idea that good, honest, hard work guarantees a just outcome. Maybe it wasn't just broken recently. Maybe it was always more of a mythology, a necessary story to get mass buy-in to mobilize populations for industrial work.
And now that mythology is just wearing thin. It's exposed.
It feels fully exposed to many, and this exposure creates this double whammy: economic despair plus that crushing spiritual hollowness. It forces you to confront the idea that the rules you were taught, the rules you tried to live by, simply don't apply to the people benefiting most from the way things are now.
Okay, so this feeling, this realization that the contract is broken, it leads us right into thinking about, well, how most of us spend most of our waking lives working. And here, we really have to talk about the work of the late anthropologist David Graeber, specifically his concept of the bullshit job.
Right. Graeber's work here is essential for understanding this weirdness in modern labor. He defined a bullshit job, and he was very direct with the term as a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or even pernicious that the person doing the job secretly knows it. They can't justify its existence deep down. They feel, often quite acutely, that if their role just disappeared tomorrow,
Nothing bad would happen.
nothing bad would happen, the world wouldn't suffer, and in some cases, Graeber suggests, the world might even be slightly better off.
And the sources, they give some great examples, don't they? It helps make it concrete. It's not just about, say, middle managers shuffling papers, though that's part of
Oh
it.
yeah, it goes way beyond that stereotype. We're talking about roles like corporate lawyers who exist primarily to threaten other corporate lawyers,
Yeah.
or lobbyists whose job is to convince politicians not to do things.
Or those internal roles.
Yeah.
People writing documentation for software nobody uses anymore, or creative vice presidents in companies where nothing creative actually happens.
Exactly. Or my favorite kind of example from the readings: the person whose main function seems to be formatting PowerPoint slides for meetings that achieve nothing, or just forwarding emails up and down a chain, high-paid email forwarders.
And the really, really weird part, the paradox that Graeber and these sources highlight, is the compensation.
It's completely backwards, isn't it? It's this spectacular inversion. Generally speaking, the more meaningless the job seems to be,
The less tangible its output.
the less connected it is to actual human needs or creating something useful. The higher the pay tends to be, the better the benefits, the greater the perceived status.
And you have to contrast that immediately with the people whose work is undeniably essential, the undervalued.
Absolutely. Think about the people Graeber would say literally hold society together.
Nurses, teachers, care workers for children, for the elderly,
Yeah.
sanitation workers, people growing and transporting our food, delivery drivers, especially now.
Their work is essential. You take it away, society collapses. It requires real physical, emotional, often intellectual labor.
And
Low pay, often precarious contracts, poor benefits, if any, and frequently they're treated with a kind of systemic disrespect, looked down upon,
it just became blindingly obvious during the pandemic, didn't it?
hyper-visible. For that brief, terrifying moment, everyone was forced to acknowledge who was actually essential.
We clapped for them, called them heroes.
We did. But as soon as the immediate crisis seemed to recede, what happened?
Back to normal.
Pretty much. The system snapped right back to undervaluing them, which demonstrates, brutally, that their market value, the price the system puts on their labor, is deliberately kept low, even though their social value is immense, arguably priceless.
That moment, that clarity, seeing the real value, and then watching society just consciously choose to ignore it again. That was a really harsh lesson in how this value system actually works.
Yeah.
But it raises the obvious question: why? Why does this absurdity persist? If these jobs are pointless and expensive, why don't companies just get rid of them?
Ah, okay. Now we're hitting Graeber's really crucial systemic point. The argument in the sources, connecting back to that broken contract idea, is that this absurd structure, this proliferation of bullshit jobs, isn't just some accidental inefficiency. It's not a bug.
It's a feature.
It's presented as necessary to maintain social control, necessary to preserve the tattered illusion of the system we were just talking about.
Okay, hang on. How does creating pointless work enforce control?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
Think about it this way. What would happen if you actually rewarded meaningful, essential work properly? Imagine if nurses, teachers, sanitation workers, care providers, if they earned significantly more, had fantastic benefits, ample time off, real security. What would the consequences be?
Well, a lot more people might want to do those jobs.
Possibly. But two bigger things would likely happen, according to this analysis. First, that illusion we discussed, that capitalism is inherently meritocratic, that wealth follows virtue or difficulty, it would just instantly shatter. The emperor would have no clothes. Second, and maybe more critical from a control perspective, a large part of the population, the people doing the real work, would suddenly have the time, the energy, the mental space, the resources
To think, to organize.
to think critically,
Yeah.
to organize collectively, to demand fundamental changes to a system that clearly wasn't serving them well before. They'd have less fear, more power. So the argument goes, the existence of all these high-paying, status-heavy, yet ultimately meaningless jobs acts as a kind of social bribe.
A bribe. For who?
For a significant chunk of the educated professional class, it keeps them comfortable, busy, invested in the system, even if their work feels hollow, they're occupied. And simultaneously, the systematic underpayment and overexhaustion of the essential workers ensures they are too tired, too stressed, too preoccupied with basic survival.
To effectively challenge the status quo.
Precisely. They're depleted.
Wow. So the system needs to create these layers of pointless activity to distract from the fundamental inversion of value, the high-paying bullshit jobs, by the complicity, or at least the quietude, of the comfortable.
While the exhausting, low-paying essential jobs ensure the physical and mental depletion of the necessary workforce,
The absurdity isn't a mistake, it's the mechanism.
it's presented as an energy management system almost, disguised as a modern employment structure. It guarantees that the vast reservoir of human creativity, intellect, physical capability, all that potential energy in the population is either siphoned off into non-productive tasks.
Or just burned out keeping the lights on.
Exactly, successfully preventing that energy from ever consolidating into a real political force that could demand something different.
Okay, so we've talked about the structure of work, this weird inversion. Now let's shift focus a bit to the effect this has on the individual psyche, the internal experience. And to do that, we probably need to jump back again, back over a century, to Karl Marx.
Absolutely. Marx's ideas about industrial capitalism, particularly his concept of alienation, feel chillingly relevant now. Not just for factory workers, but for office workers, gig workers, everyone caught in the modern system.
Right, alienation. Can you unpack that a little? What did he mean by it?
Marx identifies several interconnected forms of alienation. Let's maybe focus on a couple that really resonate with the source material we're looking at. First, there's alienation from the product of your labor. The worker creates something, pours their effort and skill into it.
Whether it's a physical object or like a piece of code or a report?
Exactly. But the moment it's finished, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the owner, to capital. The worker is fundamentally separated from the results of their own creativity and effort. The value they generated is immediately taken.
You see that so starkly in the gig economy, don't you? The delivery driver does all the work, takes all the risk, but owns none of the platform, none of the data, none of the accumulated value.
Precisely. Or think of a team of software developers. They might spend months, years, building a complex system. But they're alienated from the ultimate ownership, the profits it generates, maybe even the final purpose it's put to. It's not theirs. And the second form, which might be even more corrosive psychologically, is alienation from what Marx called our species being.
Species being, what's that?
It's basically our fundamental human essence, our capacity for conscious, creative, purposeful, self-directed activity. It's what separates us from animals who just act on instinct. When labor becomes just a means to survive, something you have to do, dictated by a boss, by a clock, by algorithms, it strips away that uniquely human part of us. Work stops being an expression of self and becomes just selling your time and energy to stay alive.
The sources use this really stark metaphor here.
Yeah.
The worker being treated like a battery.
Yeah.
You're plugged in, drained of your energy until you're not efficient or profitable enough anymore, and then you're just swapped out, replaced.
It's the ultimate commodification of human life, isn't it? Treating people purely as disposable energy sources for the profit machine. And this dehumanization, this sense of being disposable, it manifests in so many ways. Think about that relentless, often totally fake, performative team culture in many corporate environments.
Oh yeah, the forced enthusiasm, team building exercises that feel meaningless.
Exactly. You're pushed into this constant, low-level competition with your colleagues, fighting for visibility, for promotions, sometimes just to keep your job, but you have to do it all with a big, cheerful, compliant smile. We're all a family.
While knowing you could be cut loose tomorrow if the numbers dip.
Right. And the result, the sources argue, is this profound spiritual hollowness.
It reminds me of that image used in one of the texts.
Yeah.
being like a jack-o'-lantern that forgot what Halloween was for.
That's a great line.
You have the outward appearance, right? The carved smile, the shape of a functional, productive person. But the light inside, the unique purpose, the reason for being,
Yeah.
it's gone. Replaced by just compliance, exhaustion.
And the trade-off becomes brutally clear and deeply degrading. Work stops offering meaning, purpose, or craft. It just demands your energy, your time, your absolute compliance. You're forced into this transactional humiliation, basically, trading your dignity, your autonomy, your mental health for basic necessities.
Like healthcare, or, as the sources point out with almost cynical precision, dental insurance. Trading your soul for a filling.
It frames the stakes very clearly.
Okay, so if Marx diagnosed this state of alienation, this hollowing out, then Mark Fisher, much more recently, diagnosed our psychological acceptance of it, our inability to imagine anything else, with his concept of capitalist realism.
Yes. Fisher's work is absolutely central here. Capitalist realism isn't just saying capitalism is dominant. We all know that. It's this deeper, more pervasive belief, often unconscious, that capitalism is the only conceivable reality, the only viable way to organize society.
It's like the air we breathe. We don't even notice it's there.
Pretty much. It sets the horizons of possibility. It's the widespread sense that there's simply no alternative. Even if we hate parts of the current system, even if we see its flaws, the idea of replacing it feels impossible, utopian, naive. Fisher's famous line captures it perfectly. It's easier to imagine the end of the world, asteroids, climate collapse, zombies, than the end of capitalism.
That is staggering when you think about it. It means we're not just trapped economically, we're trapped imaginatively.
That's the core argument. It's the ultimate psychological colonization. Because if you genuinely cannot imagine a world structured differently,
a world where maybe bullshit jobs don't exist, or essential work is valued, or production aims at need instead of just profit.
right. If you can't even conceive of that as a possibility, then every problem, every crisis you encounter, whether it's climate change, mental health epidemics, soaring inequality, it has to be understood as a technical glitch within the existing system.
Something to be managed, tweaked, reformed, but never replaced.
Exactly. Even if the system itself is the root cause of the crisis, you can only think about solutions that operate within its logic. Because imagining stepping outside that logic feels like imagining nothing. It feels unrealistic.
But hang on, what about all the protests? The activism, Occupy Wall Street, climate movements, people pushing for democratic socialism, even just people trying to live simpler lives off-grid. Aren't those signs that people can imagine alternatives, that capitalist realism isn't total?
That's a really important challenge, and Fisher definitely addressed it. His argument and what comes through in the sources reflecting on his work is that capitalist realism is incredibly effective at absorbing and neutralizing dissent.
How does it do that?
Often by commodifying it. Critique becomes another product to be sold. You get anti-capitalist movies produced by massive corporations. You get punk rock aesthetics used to sell luxury goods. Ethical consumerism allows you to feel like you're resisting while still participating fully in the market. Genuine political alternatives are often framed not as wrong necessarily, but just as fundamentally unrealistic, impractical fantasies. Nice ideas, but they'd never work in the real world.
So the system sort of co-ops the energy of resistance, turns it into another commodity, or dismisses it as childish.
That's the mechanism described. It contains the threat by either selling it back to you or pathologizing it as naive.
And this links directly to how the system deals with the psychological fallout, doesn't it? Pathologizing systemic issues as individual problems.
Absolutely crucial point. The sources argue very strongly that the massive rise in things like depression and anxiety, yes, there are biological factors, genetic predispositions, brain chemistry, nobody denies that. But they argue it's also, significantly, a perfectly rational response to a system that demands infinite productivity from finite beings.
A rational response, not just a personal failing.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're constantly pressured to do more, be more efficient, be available 24/7, compete endlessly, optimize yourself, while knowing your value is purely instrumental and you could be replaced.
And your resources, your time, your energy, your actual lifespan are fundamentally limited.
Then burnout, anxiety, depression, a sense of despair, these aren't necessarily signs that your brain is broken. They might be signs that you're reacting appropriately to an insane situation, an entirely logical outcome of being ground down by impossible demands. And the really insidious part, the critique here, is how society tends to handle this. It pathologizes the exhaustion.
Treats it as your weakness. You're not resilient enough. You need better stress management. Have you tried mindfulness?
Right. It demands you fix yourself often through buying more things, wellness products, self-help books, therapy apps, rather than challenging the system that's generating the widespread exhaustion and despair in the first place.
So the burden of adaptation falls entirely on the individual.
Entirely, which conveniently ensures the systemic violence, the relentless pressure, remains invisible, unquestioned. It's just the way things are.
Okay, so if we pull all these threads together now, we've got the collapse of that old moral contract, the rise of pointless work that somehow pays well, the deep alienation Marx described, and this pervasive capitalist realism that traps our imagination. What's the final destination? What's the ultimate spiritual consequence for someone living inside this?
It leads us to what the sources describe as the core existential void, the deep hole at the center of the modern experience, which they sometimes call the business ontology.
Business ontology, what does that mean?
Ontology is the study of being, of what it means to be. So business ontology is the idea that our very being, our fundamental reality and worth as humans, is now defined entirely through the lens of business, through market value.
So inequality isn't just about money. It's about existence itself.
That's the terrifying implication. The sources argue that the most brutal revelation of modern inequality isn't just they have more stuff than me. It's the realization that market value has become the sole operative measure of human worth. Your value is your profitability, your capacity to generate returns or be efficiently managed as an asset.
That must trigger a devastating internal shift psychologically. You stop asking the economic question, maybe. Why don't I have what they have?
And you start asking the much deeper, much more painful existential question. If my worth isn't measurable in profit, if I'm not productive enough, if I'm easily replaced by a cheaper battery, am I even real? Do I even matter?
Wow, that's heavy.
It's the invisible damage, isn't it? The erosion of self-worth that you can't track on a GDP graph or a stock market ticker. The sources connect this to a kind of silent despair. It comes from realizing that the whole Game 1 text uses the metaphor of monopoly was rigged from the start, designed for extraction, not fair play.
Yet, because of capitalist realism,
Everyone keeps playing, or feels they have to keep playing, pretending the rules are fair, pretending their moves matter in the way they were told they should, desperately trying to prove their profitability just to feel like they have a right to exist.
and the void. That's the space where real meaning used to be. Meaning from community, from craft, from purpose outside of profit.
Exactly. That space has been hollowed out and replaced by the relentless calculus of the market.
And if you can't find meaning, and you can't genuinely imagine a different future because, as Fisher said, the future feels canceled, leaving only this endless, exhausting present.
And you're stuck, trapped in this loop of just getting through the day, the week, the year, survival without purpose.
And in that loop, people desperately need ways to cope, right? To manage the feeling of being disposable, of living in that void.
Absolutely. And the sources tend to identify two main coping strategies that emerge from this business ontology. The first is kind of obvious.
Yeah.
You just double down. You lean into hustle culture.
Grind harder, optimize everything, try desperately to win the rigged game by sacrificing even more of your life, your health, your sanity.
Yeah. Chasing that elusive jackpot, that validation through market success, even if it means burning yourself out completely, it's a frantic race.
Okay, so that's one response. What's the other?
The other, which Fisher diagnosed so acutely and which feels incredibly widespread, is what he termed depressive hedonia.
Depressive hedonia. That sounds like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it? But it captures something specific. It's not about finding genuine, lasting pleasure or joy. It's about the constant, compulsory pursuit of low-level stimulation to numb the pain, the boredom, the underlying despair.
Like, what kind of activities?
Think about the endless scroll through social media feeds. Binge-watching entire seasons of shows without really engaging. Compulsive online shopping. Consuming vast amounts of easily digestible, highly stimulating, but ultimately flat and unsatisfying content. Junk food for the soul, maybe.
So the goal isn't really happiness. It's just distraction.
Yeah.
Muting the background noise.
Muting the existential dread. Yeah. Muting the spiritual hollowness that comes from being defined solely as a productive unit in a system that feels meaningless. It's using pleasure, or rather pleasure-seeking activities, as an anesthetic.
So it's not that people can't feel pleasure anymore.
No, that's not quite it. The key distinction Fisher and others make is that the pleasure itself stopped feeling real. It doesn't nourish. It doesn't satisfy that deeper hunger for meaning or connection or purpose.
It's just consumption. Another cycle.
It's an endless loop of stimulation that never actually lands. You're constantly seeking validation, relief, something in the next click, the next episode, the next purchase.
But the satisfaction never really arrives.
Yeah.
Because the core problem, your perceived disposability within this business ontology, the lack of intrinsic meaning remains completely unaddressed.
Exactly. The consumption itself just becomes another form of labor, in a way. Another task to perform in the endless present. Distracting, maybe? But ultimately just as hollow as the bullshit job.
Wow. So we started this whole discussion with that deep yearning for cosmic fairness, didn't we? For proof that our effort, our lives actually matter. And we seem to have ended up here, watching that yearning kind of dissolve into the flat, compulsive cycle of depressive hedonia, a coping mechanism to make the unbearable present just bearable. Barely. #tag outro.
So, yeah. We've taken quite a journey today, haven't we? A real deep dive into the roots of this widespread feeling of existential exhaustion. We trace it from the collapse of that old Weberian idea, the moral justification for capitalism.
And the
right?
Marx's still relevant description of alienation, how we get separated from our work and ourselves.
Then dissecting Graeber's brilliant analysis of bullshit jobs, how meaninglessness becomes necessary for control.
And landing finally with Fisher's diagnosis of capitalist realism, how it traps our imagination, and the resulting coping mechanism of depressive hedonia. It feels like the conclusion is pretty stark. That old moral universe, the one where we could at least believe there was a link between working hard, being virtuous, and getting a fair reward, that seems to have utterly collapsed.
Yeah, the sources suggest it's gone.
And what's left in its place is this profound inversion, where value and effort seem completely scrambled, leaving this huge reservoir of collective exhaustion.
An exhaustion that the system itself then tries to pathologize, right? It tries to frame as just your individual failure to cope, your lack of resilience. The ultimate synthesis, pulling it all together, it reveals what one source calls the cosmic joke of modern capitalism.
The cosmic joke.
Yeah. It demands that we, as human beings, find our identity, our purpose, our very sense of self-worth within systems that are designed purely for energy extraction, for efficiency, for profit. Systems that, by their very nature now, seem to explicitly deny the possibility of reward based on actual human virtue or social contribution or inherent worth. It asks for meaning where it refuses to provide any.
We're left adrift then, in what feels like a marketplace of souls maybe, where the only God is the bottom line, the only real divinity is profit.
And the only salvation most people can even imagine is just escape from the grind.
Whether that's the fantasy of a lottery win or just checking out, numbing out through consumption, disconnecting. So here's the thought we want to leave you with today. If the whole system at its core relies on us believing in this karmic contract, this effort equals reward equation, a contract that our deep dive today, drawing on these sources, suggests was maybe never real, or at least is definitively broken now, then what's the very first step toward even imagining a reality outside of that capitalist realism?
If we can start to agree, maybe, that the game feels rigged, what does the system actually look like that rewards genuine human contribution, creativity, care? Instead of just rewarding successful exploitation or meaningless busy work, what does that first step of imagination look like? That's the question to ponder.